Hello, everybody, and welcome to our fifth episode of ASTROPILLED, the only podcast slash talk show, maybe, where you can watch a live chart reading happen before your very eyes and learn a little bit about Kay, if you know her, or just about astrology in general, and find out how it's done. That's really the main purpose of this. We keep it casual and simple. Little introduction. My name is Saddle Sood, or Sadal, or Saddle, or Salad, or Sad, whatever you'd like. In real life, I am a software architect, and I've been in the development space, software dev, for about 9 or 10 years at this point. I've been studying astrology for about 4. So my focus tends to be around techniques of computation and statistics around astrology, and I'm personally really interested in the idea of astrological computation, which is essentially just enabling us to do more cool stuff with astrology and computers. I'm going to kick this over to Maybe, and then to you, Kehu. So Maybe, why don't you give us your little intro?
Hey, I'm Maybe Gray. In real life, I am just about to be a lawyer, a little baby lawyer. And so astrology and tarot and magic just represents this whole other side of my life that I don't get to express much in my day-to-day work. And I love having this other way of thinking and this other way of understanding myself and the universe and the people around me through a lens of like archetype and mysticism and magic and fate. And I find all of it so cool on the psychological and the mythological and the divination levels. It's just an area that fascinates me so much, and there's so much to learn about it. It's a really exciting thing to be interested in because I know that I could study it for the rest of my life. So I love being a part of other people's introduction to astrology, helping people explore their own curiosity, and seeing what resonates is super exciting for me.
Heck yeah. Kay, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, but also what your experience is and perspective of astrology?
Okay, let me finish this truffle.
Yeah.
I'm Kehu, and in real life, I work in tribal governance under wellness, so I'm really involved in the indigenous scene here in Alaska. I live on the Aleutian chain in Alaska, which I don't even know if anybody's familiar with Alaska, but it's like there's like a chain of islands basically, and I live there and work there. But I'm actually in the middle of a transition because I really want to deepen my understanding of like tattooing and traditional tattooing and like mystic the mystical understanding that like my people and like all these indigenous cultures have always held with it, and I kind of want to deepen the practice and kind of use that as a bridge towards like all these like the more ethereal things in life. And astrology, there's not much I know about it, but I love like how it works with archetypes, and I definitely feel like I've founded I've grounded a bunch of my like navigation process and identity through that, which is cool, and it's nice to relate to other people who are into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Cool. Well, let's just jump straight into it. So, and we'll try and keep a specific lens also on the idea, of indigenous experience and community and sort of, the land, since those are things that you express you're interested in. But also feel free to throw out, adjustments, corrections, things you in particular want to hear about as we go. So everybody knows the runtime is about an hour. We do go over a little bit if everybody has time and more cool stuff to talk about. Otherwise, we'll just cap it 55 minutes from now. So I'll just jump into this chart here. Usually we like to start with the sun, moon, and rising, or the big three. But to back up, let me tell you about this chart a little bit. So a natal chart is essentially a 2D projection of a 3D sphere. It's the celestial sphere, looking at the Earth from the outside, essentially. So you can imagine this line here represents the horizon. So this point right here is called your rising point or sign, or your ascendant. And this represents the angle, the specific degree of the zodiacal sign that was on the horizon at the time of your birth. this is a special point. A lot of people only are familiar with their sun sign in astrology, so they know that they're a Capricorn or a Leo or a Libra or what have you. But we actually have an entire sky available to us. And so these different individual placements I consider to represent different areas of life, or the different areas of your personal inner world, but also the types of things that you tend to experience as a result. And then the actual signs will tend to indicate how they're expressed, and then the aspects between them will then represent how in the manner in which these different planetary personality expressions interact with one another. And then finally, we'll break into the house system a little bit. We've got this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is a manner of dividing the sky into areas of life. So the different areas that these planets land in will have to do with the areas that you find particularly emphasized in this lifetime. So to start with, yeah. So we started with Virgo Rising here, and Virgo Rising people tend to be very focused on. Well, let me start with the description of the Ascendant first, because it's important, because it's a little different from how you normally read the Sun or Rising. The Ascendant is essentially the idea is it's the energetic imprint on yourself that you got at the first breath unassisted after your birth. So after you come out and the umbilical cord is cut or you have a first breath, that is your rising sign. And so it is this sort of like energetic influence across your entire character. And Virgo qualities tend to be very service oriented, very detail oriented. There's a sense of sort of like purity or innocence sometimes, particularly creative, good with the hands, focused on things that are practical, pragmatic, grounded, often also relating to being of service to other people. And the Virgo Ascendant, in particular, will tend to have a refined yet distinguished and noticeable sort of like fashion sense. It tends to be very particular, but not overly ostentatious a lot of the time, but very like neat. That's my own little ad from a lot of observation of Virgo rising people. So we've got some of this going on, which is interesting because it implies that there's a part of your character that is can be very tactical, very pragmatic, very practical, but all those things are applied towards helping others, and also like a diligent sort of like correction, analytical, like making sure that all the pieces are in order sort of element is very big with Virgo as well, and I expect that expresses itself with some of these ascendant placements. Turning over to the sun, excuse me, we've got your sun in Capricorn, and sun and Capricorn people tend to be have their creative energy colored by self-control, an element of traditionalism. There's a inherent understanding of the value of structure and tradition and rules and authority and history. It can end up being a little bit conservative in some expressions, but on the other hand, the most healthy expression is a tie and a root to who you are and where you come from, and the nature of society and tradition and traditionalism, things like that. Like those can all be very good things in their own right. And so sun in Capricorn people often tend to be very hardworking. They're very motivated by achievement. They often want to work on things in sort of a single-minded manner with a lot of discipline towards well-defined goals, and a lot of the time like how well they're feeling or like their vitality is affected by this sense of self, like how are they doing in life, like what's going on. Now an interesting thing, let's get over to the moon and then I'll kick it over to maybe and Kay. So you mentioned that your birth time might be off by 15 minutes or so, is that right, Kay? Yeah, so that's a little... Sorry, what was that?
Like, it could be, like, even, like, half an hour.
Okay.
But I know, yeah. But
Gotcha.
It's, like, pretty... Yeah.
Okay, so I put your birth time for like 15 minutes on the hour, and we ended up with your moon being right at 0 degrees Scorpio, and then depending on whether or not you were born 30 minutes earlier or 30 minutes later, this moon position absolutely changes enough in that time because it moves rather quickly. So I actually gathered like two interpretations for moon in Scorpio versus Libra. So I'm going to read a couple lines to you and ask you which you feel like is more relevant. So we'll do like a little mini rectification here. So the moon in general is about how you react to like emotional happenings, like your emotional sense of self and where you find yourself expressing your sense of safety, of comfort, of, like, how do I find my grounded sense of self that feels nurtured and protected. And so it'll often indicate the ways in which we tend to react to situations automatically. So moon in Libra, this is if your birth time was a little bit earlier, is reacts with objectivity to the environment and all experiences with a strongly developed sense of fairness, also thinks before reacting, weighs all sides of a situation, which can contribute to indecisiveness. Finding balance and harmonization of polarities is necessary for emotional tranquility, eager to please and to see others' points of view. Now, so that was Libra, moon in Libra. I'm going to read moon in Scorpio next. Reacts intensely, passionately with controlled emotional power. Self-image is affected by complex, turbulent emotions. Confidence sometimes undermined by negative emotions or supported by passionate sense of purpose. Depth of feelings and secretiveness contribute to person's mystique and charisma. So those are pretty different descriptions. It's also tricky because you're literally right in between them, so it's possible you might have a little bit of both. But how do you relate to those two descriptions, Kay?
I actually relate to Scorpio, but I feel like for a long time I've resonated with the Libra because of my ability to like want to like balance things out or like weigh out all the options, but that could just as easily be like a Capricorn grounded quality because every time I try to understand something, it's usually by grounding it to like what I know and like my connection to the earth, and like it's not really like I'm not really weighing anything. I'm just like, does it make sense in my context?
Yeah, and it gets It gets a little trickier here, too, because you also have your Mars in Libra. So you do have Libran elements to your personality. I personally also think that you're probably more of a moon in Scorpio, just from what I know of you. I feel like your inner world tends to be very, like, deep, complex. It seems like it has a lot of, like, like a watery element to it. And this would be one of your significant water placements, I think. So just, kind of guessing, going off the way you describe it, it does sound like your Libra nature is a little bit more detached from your emotional sense of self, whereas the emotional self probably reacts in a more scorpionic way. So we'll use this chart with the idea that the moon is in Scorpio. So I already read off some of the stuff in Moon and Scorpio, but I'll tell you also that Moon and Scorpio people tend to be like very intense as well. The nature of Scorpio is to obsessively fixate over things in some instances, especially with the moon. It's like this part of you, yeah, I see you nodding, so yeah, that probably resonates. It's the part of you that like wants to go deep with a topic or with an emotion or a feeling or an experience and like dig it apart, and in the process you sort of end up transforming yourself in relation to it. Like that's sort of very much the nature of a moon in Scorpio.
Yeah, because I feel like with Libra, like coming like that description of fairness and like wanting to weigh things out, I feel like I only really express those qualities when like in the middle of like conflict, which like makes sense for like Mars, I guess. So yeah, I definitely feel things intensely, and I'm very like reclusive and secretive about them until I've like grounded and come to like my own practical conclusions.
I love that.
That feels very like accurate.
Yeah, cool. Well, I'll turn this over to Maybe. What are you seeing here? I've gone over the SMR. Do you want to look at anything else or just add more? What are your thoughts, Maybe?
Yeah, I guess something that stands out to me, given what we've talked about so far, is actually Venus and Aquarius right next to Neptune and Uranus, sharing the same sign. And then with the sun there, all in the fifth house too. think that I get kind of a picture of like this other side of you. Like there's this like more grounded, more like intense, more kept together Capricorn, Scorpio kind of side of you. But and then there's this sort of like super progressive nature around all of these other planetary energies hanging out within, you know, the same sort of 10 degrees or so in Aquarius. So I would imagine that you're like, you like change. You probably feel like things could be better. Like that's the way that you look at things, is you can see the area for improvement everywhere that you look in your life. And then you approach all of that, you know, room for change and room to infuse the world with your own ideals, with a lot of like creativity and playfulness and a sense of like almost like romance. And I feel like that romantic flair especially probably has this really diffuse nature, like rather than being the kind of person who gets like an insane intense crush on a particular person. It's almost more like you have a crush on your own life, and you have a crush on the world, and
Yes.
you does that resonate? Because that's like this like Neptune, Venus, Uranus all together in the fifth house in Aquarius seems to me like crushing hard on life. Like it's hot girl summer forever for you or something.
Yeah, actually, because I've traveled a lot. Or can you hear me? I think like I heard something, but I can't tell it.
Yeah, we've
No,
got
we
you.
can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, sweet. Let me go back. Um, what was I going to say? Flip it. Hold on, let me figure this out.
Yeah, no worries. Take your time.
Process.
Like I've been to so many places and exposed to, or not so many, but I feel like a lot for, I don't know, the average person. Like I feel like I've always found a way to love like wherever I ended up. Like I grew up in the Philippines and I like loved it so much, and like I had zero concept of the rest of the world, and then I ended up in Hawaii, and then I ended up in Alaska, and like they all just are like the same thing to me, and they're all like my loves. and I do and I do like, I feel like mixed. I wonder if it's like a Capricorn quality, or maybe a mix of like the Aquarius and like crushing on life. But I feel like I crush on more life things like more often than actually like getting into romance. I feel like that's a very rare thing for me. Like I don't experience that desire very frequently, and when I do, it's very like intense and committed, and like I want it, like I want it to fit in the context of my life and what I want to do and what I want to give. Like it's very particular, and I think that in some ways that has hindered me, but in other ways it also just like keeps me in line with what I want to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Aquarius is a very like communitarian sign, and so I would see in that like a lot of your passion for your like heritage and culture, and like your connection to the community that you belong to at large, and how for there to be a one-on-one connection, it would have to fit into that with a lot of alignment, and at the same time be able to get past your kind of like Scorpio moon
Yeah.
private nature. And so there's like a really loving passionate dedicated side of you that comes out in this combination between your Capricorn and your Aquarian energy. And then this like Scorpio moon I almost see as sort of like the gatekeeper of like who gets to get real close.
Yes, that's like 100% it, because I feel like I've met so many people who like they could really like, you know, like hey, vibe with me, but there's just a part of me that's like that just like knows like from the get-go, it's like no, like this isn't like, there's this super strong like gatekeeper, like you say. It's like I can see like how things could work kind of in the present sense, but I also have this like larger vision of like how will this all fit. which is like, yeah, my gatekeeper.
Yeah, it's very interesting because you have a very big Venus story in your chart, and Venus is all about pleasure, love, romance, aesthetic enjoyment, enjoyable experiences, and the joy that we experience of life in general. And one of the flip sides of Aquarius is that it can be a little bit more detached. It's more abstract, intellectual. It has to be like a Venus in Aquarius is more likely to fall in love with somebody who comes bearing a manifesto or something like that, like it's a very like abstract intellectual like passion. I see by your nod and your smile that resonates. Yeah. But also one thing that we don't touch on a ton in this show is terms. So I've always got the terms turned on, but the terms are a traditional astrology technique that break up each sign into 5 of the classical planets being a sort of ruler. So you can imagine elements or the signs being the modes of expression, but then each term is also that particular expression is owned or ruled by this planet in a way. It's like the planet is, whatever planet is within a term is essentially in the term ruler's house. That's kind of how you think of it. And it only accomplishes things through its expression. So if we count up the terms, you have your sun is in Venus's term. Your moon is in, oh, not your moon, your Mars is in Venus's term. Your Jupiter is also in Mars's term. And your node is in almost Mars's term. Where else was I seeing a lot of Venus stuff? There were a couple other Venus things, but the point is that your final, well, you don't have a final dispositor, but sorry, I'm jumping into a little bit more complex techniques and confusing myself. But you have many different planets that ultimately report back to your Venus. So you have a number of things that are Martian. So you've got your moon in Mars's term, and Mars itself is in Venus's term. And then you have also, what else was it? You also have Uranus in Venus's term as well. So like all these pretty major planets here are in your chart are relating to Venus one way or another, but some of them go through the intermediary of your Mars, which is action, it is initiative, it is drive, passion, projects, things like that, which is all very Libra. And the Libran part of your Mars will tend you towards expressions that are about, fairness, making sure people are involved, making sure that, harmonies or polarities are being harmonized. That is making sure that you are connecting with people in the process or involving some sort of aesthetic influence. And the fact that Mars itself is related to Venus here means that it's all tied up into something of this Venusian story for you. And I call it out in particular because it's all in this 5th house with your sun in particular being ruled by Venus. Oh, and of course, that's the other big one. Your Ascendant is also ruled by Venus. So you have a lot of Venus stuff going on. You have some Mars stuff, but then Mars also reports to the term of Venus. And then what's interesting is that Venus itself actually is in the term of Mercury. And then Mercury is in its own final term. So this is what we call the final dispositor of your chart, where the dispositor is essentially the term ruler or some other form of ruler. So if we look at your rising, traditionally we might evaluate this by saying, okay, well, your rising's terms ruler is Venus, and your Venus terms ruler is Mercury, and Mercury's term ruler is Mercury, so your final dispositor is Mercury. So what this implies is that there, despite all of the existence of like these Venusian topics, it comes down to Mercury. It comes down to the mind, to the constructions of language, to the building of ideas, to the the mental, intellectual, verbal, linguistic world. What does that mean to you? How does this resonate to you? Because I see you reacting to it.
Well, I feel like that's basically what I've done, like basically my whole life, but like more like emphasize these last couple of years. Like I feel like so much of, or how do I frame this? Like a lot of my healing and understanding and reconnection to like the earth always, it kind of led me back to language and how like this sense of like disconnection or like like feeling like I didn't know my heritage and all of that stuff. Like I didn't know the ways anymore. But like language was like this one key that like was like untainted by whatever I thought like disconnected my heritage, whether it be like colonialism or like all these things. Like language like has always it is my like main connection to um like 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 spirit world, but also kind of like my culture, because like even though there are a lot of things that have been forgotten, that I long for, or like that understanding and that way of seeing that I feel like I really want to revive is in the language, because I feel like it's like one of the only ways to like really like store and share the spirit is through our word. And like these little things that I find like every now and then when I speak my own language, and how like it just it reconnects me to this like greater understanding, or like how my ancestors must have thought of things. Like recently, for example, the word saka means to farm, but it also means to rise. And we refer to our farmers as people who rise. And I feel like that also implies like some ancient observation that all things that grow rise, you know, and that the people who like farm are the people who take care of the things that rise. And like, it's just, I feel like there's like so much hidden like medicine in language. And I feel like just like like my final dispositive being Mercury and like involved with language and the mind, definitely super super accurate.
Yeah, and I'm going to point out one more thing and then kick it over to maybe. You've got also your Mercury is in Capricorn in the 4th house. And, you know, Mercury, Capricorn, like your sun in Capricorn can relate to all those ideas of tradition, of the land, of the earth. But your Mercury is also there, too. And it's fascinating to hear you say that, like, coming to language is where you find home. Because the 4th house is literally the house of, like, your home. It is your intimate self. It is where you kind of, like, experience and contemplate those things that are sentimental or sometimes geographically, literally your home as well. So to hear you describe that is, I just love that. And also, you know, Mercury itself being in its own place means that Mercury is the most Mercury, and Mercury himself is, or themself, I guess, as the most non-binary flexible planet, is itself a healer. It is the archetype of medicine, of knowledge, of learning, of language, of all these different things. So I love that. That's perfect. Maybe I'll turn it over to you now.
Yeah, another thing that I see that fits into this really beautifully is that in amongst all of these other 5th house creatures in Aquarius is also your south lunar node. And so the lunar nodes are like the far points of the ecliptic of the moon as it goes around the earth, and it is connected in astrology to the karmic path a person travels throughout their lives, or like the past lives from which they're drawing experience in this world, and the path toward the next life as well. And so in your chart, you have a lot of experience in these Aquarian elements. You come into this life with a lot of connection to community and progressiveness and like a real humanitarian impulse. But that puts also your north node in the sister sign Leo, which is a very deeply spiritual sign, and also really oriented towards self-expression. So the idea that there seems to be a part of you that wants to take this like rich heritage and language and background that you come from and revive it and learn how to use it as a tool to understand your own spirituality and express your own experiences about life, really follows this karmic life path that I'm seeing in your chart as well.
Nod.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd like to talk about this interesting horizon that you have. So as a general interpretive guideline, guideline, you can consider everything under the horizon to be related more to your own purposes, to your own internal world, to yourself, to your selfhood. Who are you as a person, and how do you experience the world through your own needs and desires? So you have, the second house, which is of like possessions, ownership, skills, things you accumulate. The third house having to do with communication, messages, siblings, neighbors, things like that. Fourth house is the home, generally speaking. And the fifth house is the house of creativity, offspring, both literal in terms of children, but also like art, sexual expression, things like that. And then you come up here, and then everything above the horizon is about how you relate to the outside world, how you function in the outside world. Like some people with their stuff all on the top chart, they live for the outside world. They exist to help the world, or to interface with it, or to have some sort of role on the world stage. And you have some important planets above the horizon and a lot of personal planets below the horizon, which is interesting, especially that you have your North Node in Leo in the 12th house, because Leo is the sign of the self, of self-exploration, of self-development, of self-interpretation. And being in the 12th house, which is a house of both healing, like spiritual traditions, but also releasing, it's almost like there's a story that in order to bring things to the people and to the lands that you care about, you have to develop yourself. You have to learn who you are. You have to learn what you have to offer that's already inside of you, and that's indicated by many of these aspects. And it's also very interesting to get over to some of these other things up here as well, because you've got Jupiter here in the 7th, which is a house which is also in Pisces. So Jupiter's very at home in Pisces as its ruler, and that's a traditional ruler. A modern ruler, sometimes people say Neptune, but I like to use the traditional rulers and consider the outer planets as just kind of like having affinities to the signs. Jupiter itself here represents the ways in which you grow, and also your sense of spirituality, but where you experience natural expansion and kind of like your growing as a person, having great success. Like, it's really a source of winsome joy is a way I like to explain it, but also sometimes excess, things like that. And then in Pisces, it will often give a natural sense and awareness and a need to connect with the divine or the spiritual or the unseen or the hidden. Those are all sorts of things that have to do with Pisces. The things you can't quite pin down but feel numinous or God-filled or spirit-filled in whatever way. And it's also very interesting here that you have it on the 7th house, because you've touched on relationships a little bit. A 7th house in Pisces will tend to veer towards people who are a little bit hard to pin down, who are more spiritual in nature, who are more intuitive, very sensitive, sometimes very dreamy. Like, it's essentially Piscean people. But also with the Jupiter here, you demand a lot from a partner in that expression, but you also bring a lot to that at the same time. And you can read the 7th house as both being personal relationships, but also the relationship with the other in general. And you're often talking about helping other people in a way that sounds very spiritual, that sounds very, all-encompassing, very healing, things like that. And those are all topics associated with Jupiter in Pisces in the 7th. It's like source of growth, spirituality, expansion in life, paired with this sublimative, very spiritual, very mutable, very open sign, Pisces, with this 7th house, which is all about the other person in your life. So looking at this Jupiter, I then want to turn to Saturn, which is the next planet you come to, which is very interesting because Saturn you have here in Aries, and Aries is a warrior's sign, and Saturn will tend to represent either the responsibilities that you pick up or the responsibilities that you try to escape. But I think that you have picked up your responsibilities in many manners. But it's also interesting in the 8th house, because the 8th house is a house of a lot of intensity. It has to do with sex, death, transformation, hidden things, but also other people's possessions, including sometimes their land, their property, things like that. So it's very interesting to me that you have your Jupiter in the 7th house, and then right in the next house, and this is a technique referred to as turning the wheel, where ordinarily we have our ascendant as our first house, and the second house is our personal possessions and the things that we own. So you can say, all right, the second house from the first house is your possessions, and then the seventh house also represents other people. So the second house from the seventh house is actually other people's possessions as well. So you've got a very interesting kind of connection between these two planets here, and they're also in trine to your North Node, which reiterates the story of you developing yourself in order to give to others, to help others, to, I would even say steward others, belongings, properties, land, culture, what have you. I feel like that is a story that's told very strongly here, or at least one you could certainly read through this planetary placement. I said a lot. How's all that resonating?
I feel like in there that actually makes a lot of sense based off of like how I've grown up. Do these like things also kind of, could you trace back like implications of the past based off of like that? Because like I grew up like basically exposed to a lot of trauma and abuse, and I feel like that was kind of what brought me to like spiral upwards and grow, because like if I didn't, then I probably would have just died, but I have this like craving for life, and so I just chose to spiral upwards, and I learned so much of like everything I know is coming from like the wisdom of relationships, because that's the only way to understand anything and navigate anything is like through connection. And like, I don't know, just like you saying like that connection to the land, like I definitely feel like I'm for like sovereignty and like having that connection to the land and people having access to that connection, and like through themselves first, and also just like respecting it and like creating decisions for each other based off of the wisdom of the land. Like everything that we do should, like I believe that everything that we do should be like, our questions that we ask should be on behalf of like the wisdom of the land basically. And I feel like that kind of connects with it. And also like you said, like Saturn and Aries, and like being a warrior spirit, like my last name actually like means went to war.
I love that.
So in my language, my name literally translates to like the keeper of the keys, or like if you use my name within the context of the language, which Kai is actually because or why. Last name Gumera means went to war.
Wow.
Yeah.
I love that. That is fantastic. I'm just like letting that soak in, because that's on point. Because also, Saturn itself, keeper of the keys, even though that's like one of the first translations you said, is very emblematic of Saturn in the 8th house. Like literally you're holding on to property, onto things that people have, and Saturn can be this thing that is safeguarding, protecting, controlling, holding on to things like that. That's very, very interesting to me. Yeah, I love that. I love that so much.
Yeah, and like the conversations that I've been having with my own like close friends like has to do with like basically protecting like people by protecting the land basically. And like I'm kind of like I've been setting a goal for myself to like buy land in my homeland, so that like my family can like have something there going, so that like they can worry about themselves after that, because I feel like I can't do what I want until I like do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really interesting to come back to some of these themes here of Venus, because you also have your midheaven and your IC, or Imium Coli, at the beginning of the 4th house in Venus as well. So we come back to sort of like this Venus story, especially as it relates to Mars and Libra. And I feel like this is a very Libran chart, even though it may not necessarily show itself. Or I should say that there's like, you have only one planet in Libra, but these oppositions you have between Mars in Libra and Saturn in Aries is it's an opposition, which implies and often brings in certain needs to harmonize, need to balance in the life as well. So I think that makes a ton of sense. You mentioned looking back into the past. Did you want to look back at specific dates, or were you just thinking in a more general sort of way? Because I'd say yes, absolutely, you can use astrology to look and reflect backwards as well as forwards.
I was just like thinking in a general sense.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
It's like, yeah, I don't know. I just feel like super connected to this chart right now, and
Yeah,
basically like everything that I like can recall.
Yeah, it's you. It's
life.
yours. You should feel connected to it. Maybe I'll turn it over to you for a while.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind for me too is that Saturn in Aries is like something that can often reflect a difficult early life. And so that you grew up around a lot of trauma makes a lot of sense given that placement. And it also can tie into some of the fears of intimacy that we've talked about around your Aquarius placements and the Scorpio moon as well. Early life can be part of why it's difficult to let people past that Scorpio moon gatekeeper and let them land with you through all of the airy Aquarian nature as well. Another thing that I think is really interesting talking about kind of all of these aspects together is, like Sad said, there is an opposition between your Mars and your Saturn, and so that's something that is like kind of like slow burn, long term pressure to like integrate these two different sides of your personality. But both of those aspects also they square the elements that you have in Aquarius as well. So there's kind of these two parts of your personality that are like slowly negotiating how to be integrated despite their differences. And that negotiation creates a sense of urgency for you around these Aquarian placements. So it feels often like very important and pressing, and it can kind of give you that like, this is why I get up in the morning kind of feeling, to like feel like you want to bring these like progressive communitarian cultural experiences forward from this like Uranus, Neptune, Venus area of your personality as well. And so it's interesting to see kind of like that there's like this long-term negotiation driving the next steps that you come across in each chapter of your life. I wonder how that resonates with you.
I really resonate with that because I feel like a lot of the conflict and trauma that I experienced in life, like through that like negotiation, I've always like understood it as being connected to like a greater pain or like some greater suffering, and I always like wanted to dig deeper on like where that came from and like envision that, and I always like it always went back to like to hunger to me, like we're all, I don't know, like I feel like any conflict that arises is just like needs, and our first expression of need is always hunger, like, and I feel really connected to like healing through understanding the nature of like our own hunger, because like when I experienced the trauma that I did experience, like you see like something that's super scary, like somebody hurting another person, and you witnessing that, and you start to realize that like, oh, like it's, yeah, you could call it compassion, but it's just like you understand that like at its core it's like this like hunger for love that they didn't know that was even there, like, and so it expresses itself in such like sick ways because it's so like unrecognized, and you can't even identify anymore. But like, yeah, I feel like that conflict like is directly connected to like my sense of like wanting to help like my community, because it's like I like look around my hometown and I like can't ever not see the grief that exists from hundreds of years ago. Like my hometown was actually struck by World War II, and a lot of the indigenous folks there were basically displaced for the war, and that's been a long time ago. But like, and some indigenous folks are have returned, but like the grief is still there, and it exists in like their health, and it exists in the way that they refuse to share their culture out of fear, and it exists in like the lack of growth happening in that community. Like I just feel like connect with that because I have like it gave me the ability to perceive like things through the lens of hunger. If that makes sense.
It does. It does. It actually makes so much sense. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense based on all of these placements that we've talked about already, but it also brings to the foreground for me this trine between Jupiter and Pisces, which we've talked about, and your Chiron in Sagittarius, which is, well, it's actually just on the cusp of Sagittarius and Scorpio. And so Chiron is a comet, and it's associated with sort of the core wounds that we carry in our lifetime. It's like often referred to as the wounded healer, because we keep kind of being drawn back to those same pains and drawn to resolving them over the period of our entire lives. And in this like arena, this cusp between Sagittarius and see so much of that hunger, both like literally and metaphorically, for love and for travel and for learning and for understanding and for nourishment. Like all of that really resonates to me with Chiron on that cusp, and that it's something that you've been able to like access in yourself and work with and grow from throughout your life really speaks to this easy flowing trine relationship it has with Jupiter and Pisces, which is so ready to do this kind of like deep spiritual learning and healing. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's a part of your life that feels especially present for you right now, as Jupiter has just recently ingressed into Pisces and will be spending a couple of months there. So this will probably be a particularly healing time in your life in all of these areas that we've been talking about.
I just can't help but laugh. But I had met like a healer who never will say that she's a healer, but I know she is. Like basically the epitome of like you never have to use words or language for others to recognize what you are, and language is used as a means to share an experience, because it's like she doesn't need to tell me that she's a healer for me to know that she is, in a way. And I actually recently just like serendipitously like saw her again like this week. Which I feel like makes sense when you said you wouldn't be surprised if
yeah, it's good timing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I am not surprised. As I said, I would not be. And I also think that it's like I would really invite you just to like sink into that and indulge in this like relationship that resonates with you, because is going to be so excited after it's been sharing Aquarius with Saturn for a long time, and I feel like the Jupiter that I sense that is in Pisces right now is like so excited to be in Pisces, so excited that it's not roommates with Saturn right now, so down to like indulge and float and heal and feel free. And so I like imagine all of that feeling for you in the relationship with your healer, and then in your relationship with yourself and your work and everybody else too.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'm also like in the middle of like a transition and like expanding and asking like different questions. Like I'm at the airport right now, like basically to expand.
Wow. Well, it's very interesting that you've talked about living in multiple places throughout your life and embracing all of them, because also you have in your fourth house is Sagittarius. And so Sagittarius is literally the planet of Sagittarius is literally the sign of travel, of, going places, of foreign cultures. You can be a little picky about whether or not you would consider a move from like Alaska to Hawaii or wherever else you end up going as short-term versus long-term, because it's often considered international, but I feel like they're practically totally different worlds, so that makes a lot of sense to me personally. And one thing I do want to ask about as we're here is, are I've been doing a little bit of work with the asteroids lately. Unfortunately, I think there are some other asteroids that might talk to your story very powerfully, but the one I mostly know personally is Vesta. And what's interesting about Vesta is Vesta has to do with the warrior. It is the warrior archetype. It is also, to some extent, the person who will sacrifice everything to guard the hearth. Like, Vesta is literally considered a female warrior of the hearth, of the home, who defends things. But also there's an element of like a willingness to sacrifice everything in that battle, but also there can be an element of like pushing emotions away, like keeping a stiff upper lip in order to, you know, accomplish this mission and to win and what have you. And I find it very interesting that it's here connected to your node in 23, which we know is related to a little bit of the story of you learning to define yourself, but it also sextiles your Mars, and it's enshrined to your Saturn. And I would say, like, this is probably the most combative piece of your chart. You've got two malefics that are essentially duking it out head on with each other, and then you've got Vesta right here, which is connected to both of them by sextile and trine as well. So it's just another interesting element that is connected here. But it goes back to, you've got Vesta, and I'm mixing systems and traditions a little bit, so a traditionalist might cringe at this, but Vesta is in Mercury's term, so it could imply that part of this warrior spirit that you're doing is an intellectual battle. Again, you know, it comes back to fighting with words, fighting with ideas, defending with concepts and with ideals and things like that. So, but I'm curious to hear a little bit about, like, does what I've said about Vesta resonate for you in this configuration?
Yeah, because I feel like you said, like I'm language or mind oriented, and there is like a certain battle there because I feel like language informs the mind, and I definitely feel like language is or actually like outside of language, I'm very like into silence and like that concept that that's something we all share and we all pull from, and language is a means to express that, but it's not like it's not the actual thing itself, which I feel like people constantly like struggle with, because like in different cultures, like in my culture we understood silence, and like that's where our healers like pulled healing and medicine from. Mm-hmm. And in other cultures that could be perceived as the womb of the mother, like here in indigenous cultures here in Alaska, they perceive that as the womb, which is the same thing, but language again like informs the mind in a different way. But it's like language is the bridge, but like between people and their spirits, but like silence is the bridge between ourselves and this greater thing. And I feel like people are trying to find this greater thing through the language and sharing that with each other. It's like there is no intermediary, it's just you, and you already have it. And like that's like kind of my frustration. It's like, no, stop looking for it, stop it. Stop using language.
I love that, because I mean, when we think about this too, like your Mercury, which is the originator of language, is in your fourth house, which is both the home, but it's also the lowest part in the chart and the least visible. And the 12th and 8th houses, and I think also the 4th houses, are considered hidden places. So it's literally one of the houses that is involved with secrecy, with quiet things, with silence, with can also be like subterfuge and other elements that are, taking advantage of quietness. But it's interesting to hear you reflect on this and to look at your placement here, but also, your nodal placement, your Saturn placement, and the fact that these are all, in trining houses, I guess you could call it. So they have some sort of relationship to one another conceptually. So I really, really like that. Cool. Well, we're running towards the end of time here, so maybe I'll kick it over to you, and then Kehu, if you have any stuff in particular that you'd like to focus in on as we begin to wrap, let me know. But maybe what else are you seeing here?
I guess the only other thing that's really on my mind is that we just had a solar eclipse in Gemini, and seeing that would have been like near K's midheaven and opposing. Or close to opposing Chiron and Pluto in Sagittarius is like an interesting thing. I something like lit up when she said that there's been like some big transformations or changes, and the north node of this solar eclipse was in Gemini as well. So the idea of those like having an oppositional relationship to the core wounds and the long-term transformations associated with Chiron and Pluto makes me like very curious about like what long-term transformations might have been kind of catalyzed by this recent solar eclipse. Especially, I just know so many people whose lives have changed in some sort of very drastic way, coinciding with the solar eclipse that we've just had.
Yeah, this was a pretty big one.
Okay, yeah, no, I definitely have an answer for that one. So, like, I've spent this, like, last year and a half basically saving up so that I could take a trip and, like, see, like, if, like, my mentor basically just to coordinate with my mentor for, like, tattooing and, like, if it's a good time and, like, just so I could, like, lay the groundwork out there. But then, like, I just was on a drive with my friend, like, towards, like, to see, like, that healer friend who will never say that she's a healer. And, like, just on the road, I felt, like, super open to just the concept that maybe I could just be here in Alaska. Like, because I was wanting to go to Hawaii. And, yeah, I just, like, and going back to, like, how I'm, like, super in love with just, like, places and people and things, like, that decision was basically like made because I just was like looking around at the trees and I'm like, dang, I'm not done loving you yet. So then I was like, holy shit, like this whole year I spent like thinking I was gonna do this one thing, but then like all of a sudden I'm like hitting the road and I'm just like, oh yeah, I guess this works too. And I'm like normally I would not be like super open to that because I like to like stick to the plan and like I like to like watch it come to fruition and like, you know, make it tangible. But then like it just like came to me and I was like, okay, fuck it, like I guess.
Yeah.
So like I'm taking this trip to Hawaii even though like I already have an answer. Like I knew that taking this trip would mean like I'll have an answer. I just didn't think this would be the answer. Which, yeah.
Yeah. And it's fascinating because this specific eclipse was one that happened right on top of the Mercury retrograde that we happened. So this eclipse in particular has to do with themes of Mercury, and it wouldn't surprise me if many people's Mercury got activated at least a little bit, even if they didn't have a personal placement there or what have you. But you have your midheaven in Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury, and you know, depending on if your birth time is a little bit later, this could even be, you know, farther closer to the eclipse, who knows. But you know, your Mercury placement is in the 4th house, which again has to do with place. So not only is this eclipse happening on top of Mercury in a Mercury sign in your 10th house, and as we know, you know, for you, purpose and mission and drive is related to place. It's like so perfect that your midheaven, and which is in Gemini, is ruled by a Capricorn Mercury in the 4th house, which is all about that place again. Like it's astrology, man.
And
like,
Mercury retrograde.
Yeah, exactly.
So, like, so electrically correct.
Yeah, man. I'm like thoroughly.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we do this, because it's incredible, honestly. Like it shouldn't work at all, you know. These should all be like 50-50 shots, but you know, you get most of it. It's pretty insane. Well, as we wrap, I'd love to ask you, Kay, do you have any other questions about stuff that you'd like to go into? Maybe do you have time if we run over a bit?
Yep, no problem.
Cool.
I feel like I had a question earlier, but like I'm gonna try to remember it. It had to do with so just like 7th house and Saturn and like land. I don't know the right like vernacular jargon or whatever.
Yeah.
But,
well, whatever topic, and then we can tune it in. Yeah.
Okay. So basically, like I'm in America because, like, two generations ago, my great great grandparents were hired by the Hawaiian plantation, like because they were good farmers, and our Philippines, like my people could provide like the sufficient service to like, you know, farm there. They were like on the first boat to go to Maui and basically plant sugar canes, and they had 11 children, but two of them were born like in the United States, but one of them died. But the one that lived is my great grandpa. And but like after they got done farming, they like moved to the Philippines, and they kind of just like lived the whole rest of their lives there up until my great aunt, who is a Sagittarius. I don't know if that helps. She's the one who discovered that my great grandpa was actually a citizen of the U.S., and that's basically how we ended up in America. And I feel like that topic of like the land influencing my sense of purpose and like travel, yeah, it's like all rooted in like literally hunger and land. Like that's literally the only reason I'm here.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that you have your ninth house as well in Taurus, which is another Venus ruled sign, and ninth house is generally just as this house of international travel. I think in order to get to the specifics of that story, we would probably want to look at your great grandparents' astrology as well. I bet they have a very big ninth house story, but I'd say that some of it is definitely reflected in the fact that you have this ninth house ruled by Venus, which is related to your personal creation, your offspring, your creativity, and so forth. So I definitely think that there's a story there. I mean, I'd say that the Saturn in the 8th, just as being the carrier of, you know, the flame of your family and your ancestors and your lineage, is probably a very big part of that story as well. You know, guessing a little bit, you know, you could even say as a fire sign, it's kind of like the next step in a cycle. Maybe somebody had Saturn in Sagittarius or a prominent Sagittarian placement. You can sometimes see things like that. So I'd be fascinated to look at the birth chart of your ancestor who was a Sagittarius and see if they have anything that connects to your chart, because you often see this happen like to the degree, or like the same planet is in the same place or exactly 60 degrees or 90 degrees away or something like that. There's a lot of stuff that can happen like that. I don't know if I answered your question exactly.
A lot of like Scorpio stuff too, because it was very recent, I think a few years ago, on a trip to Hawaii to visit family. I discovered that my great grandparents, who like were the first to like come to America, were also like known in my homeland as like the alchemists of the land. They were called alquimista, and apparently like they knew how to do like exorcisms and like all these like mystical things, which I had no idea about, and it was very validating to discover, because I was like experiencing my own things of like asking these questions. I didn't know like why, and like nobody else in my family, like I guess maybe it skips generations or whatever, but like no one else in my family was like handing that down. And like the only thing like mystical connection would be like my grandpa, who like said he had it, because whenever he would read it, he'd like get like headaches, and like it's just like super mystical things that like. And I think also my grandpa, like he has had like heart surgery twice, and like I think like some schools wanted to do research on him because they don't know why he's still alive, but like my brother's like, it's because he does mantras, Kay. And I'm like, yeah. So this just like it's like all hidden because nobody wants to share it, but then regardless of that, like I feel like somehow it still like makes its way to you, or like it has made its way to me somehow, which I don't know. I guess it just goes to show that like that connection is accessible to anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love for you to eventually get your like accurate birth time just for yourself. I do think that this is probably correct, what we've got for the most part, but I have a feeling that like if you were born even like 20, 30 minutes later, you might even have your sun within your fourth house, considering how important this theme is for you. And that would just like pop it right in there, because, you know, you would just move this down a little bit and then the sun would go into that fourth house at home. And it'd probably do some other interesting stuff as well, but I think most of everything would stay exactly where it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd have to like go back to my homeland, but like that'll be fun.
Yeah. I highly recommend seeing if you can get the birth charts of your parents, of siblings, of grandparents, things like that. Because when you overlay them, you begin to see things that are just insane. And you really begin to see history and lineage and the story play out over generations in a chart, which is very fascinating to see. Well, any last things from either of y'all before we wrap?
I've loved this chart though. Again,
Mm-hmm.
Both for like asking or like for like just like taking the time to read all this and like wow, I'm just so thankful for this corner of Twitter who like come together and say hi and just connect. Like this is definitely I feel like it's useful and it like serves me and I love being able to connect with people.
Great. I'm
So
glad.
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what we're here for. That's what this project is about. Thank you, everybody,
for a lot of fun.
Yeah, it really has been so much fun. Thank you, everybody, for listening in. This was AstroPilled number 5 with Kehwho, KEHWHO on Twitter. Thanks again. We had a really nice big crowd this time, so that was a lot of fun. We try to do this every week, and hopefully we'll have one for next week. Oh, and maybe you should plug Intellect real quick.
Yes, I was thinking about that. For those of you who are free tomorrow, Sad and I will be co-hosting a 3-hour conversation on astrological practices in modern times, digging into the way that technology has facilitated this revival of magical practice and getting into the basics of how astrology works, why it's been resonating with people so much lately, and just answering your questions, talking about the way that the sky has been for the past couple of months and how it might have been affecting you, all that kind of stuff. And so if you go to theintellect.com, you'll be able to find that. It's also linked and pinned to my Twitter at Maybe Gray, so you can find it there as well. And we'd love to have you there. It's going to be a great time.
Heck yeah. Well, with that, I think we can wrap. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a blast, and I'm going to close this down now. So thanks for coming. Thanks for watching.
Thanks,
everybody.
Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Cool. Bye, y'all.